Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning into this very special episode. As you can see, I have two guests with me today, and it is my honor to welcome Nikole Collins-Puri and Maya Morales Garcia. Now, Nikole is a social justice visionary and former CEO of Techbridge Girls. With 20 plus years in tech, philanthropy, and education, she excels as a strategic leader, driving organizational growth and national impact. Nikole is a recognized thought leader, leveraging her influence to amplify voices for social change within equity, education equity, and economic mobility spaces. Nikole's impactful journey includes leadership roles at AT&T, Women's Foundation of California, and the College Board. She's been awarded for community and industry leadership, and she holds an MPA and a BA in political science, like me. Maya, as Beyond 100K's Chief Program Officer, she leads the organization's efforts to take growth and nurture a vibrant network of diverse, powerful partners from across sectors to take action as a community and make meaningful progress towards reaching our moonshot goal. Previously, she served as the science and STEM education lead for both the Colorado Department of Education as well as the Office of the State Superintendent of Education for the District of Columbia, where she oversaw standards implementation efforts and led strategic initiatives in STEAM. We have the Women of Color STEAM powerhouse on the show. Ladies, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Dr. Berry, for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Wonderful. Now, I'll start with you, Nikole. You have stepped down from your CEO role at Techbridge, but you're still serving as an advisor there. Tell us a little bit about Techbridge Girls.
Well, yes, it has been almost 2 months now that I am post-CEO life. So it's been an amazing last 2 months. But I reflect in this last 2 months in so much of what Techbridge Girls is. And for almost 25 years, we have been re-engineering the way that STEM education is taught, engaged, and delivered for Black, Indigenous, and Latino girls across the country. At the end of the day, we feel that STEM education is not working for our girls. And so we really want to reimagine the pedagogical approach to STEM education. And we do that by equipping educators with our training, our equitable framework around STEM education, and the resources and materials that they need to actually deliver high quality, equitable programming to girls across the country. So that's the work of Techbridge Girls. I'm so proud of it and all that it's been able to accomplish. And as an advisor, I just continue to help support and amplify its mission, help advance the mission forward, and hopefully get to the place where we are truly reaching and serving 1 million girls by 2030.
Wow, that is just such an awesome goal. And I can imagine that there are some people listening going, wait a minute, what is that? So look down in the show notes. We've got Techbridge Girls information, contact information, website, all of that. You'll be able to go ahead and click on that and get some more information. Now, Maya, please tell us about Beyond 100K.
Absolutely. In our capacity, we're really focused on ending the STEM teacher shortage by 2042. So thinking about what is it going to take to make sure that every student in America has a teacher equipped to support them in learning STEM. And we believe that can only happen if teachers look like the students that they're serving. And so we're thinking about ending the STEM teacher shortage with equity, representation, and belonging, knowing that every teacher needs that toolkit to support students to be the best they can be in STEM. And our mission is really to unite a network of partners to do that work, right? And so no one person can end the STEM teacher shortage alone. It's going to take a community. Imagine that, right? So leaning into this idea of community to do that. So my job and my team's amazing work is to really bring that community together, the right dynamics, and create the container for us to reimagine what classrooms or what the training needs to look like, what the pathways into teaching need to look like. And part of that also includes some repair work about what does it mean to enter the teaching profession for a lot of communities of color who were pushed out of the profession for such a long time. And so we're kind of delving into what does it mean to experience belonging as a teacher, and also what does it mean to cultivate classrooms of belonging for our students. So that's
That
our
is
work.
awesome work. And I know I shared with you before that my first teaching assignment was a 7th grade science, middle school science teacher. And the last bit of STEM work that I had done, let's see, there was the one class in genetics that I was required to take. I had to take one class in college. That was a natural science. So I took genetics 10. And the 10 courses in the UC system were for people who were not majors in that area, right? So it was genetics for non-science people. That was me. And so teaching that course, I felt like I was doing a disservice to my students. I did the best I could. Layer onto that, we did not have a written curriculum. There was no adopted textbook. It was a district that believed that every teacher should create what they needed for their classrooms. So they gave me a budget, and I went and bought rats, and we raised rats and we didn't cut any open. We didn't kill any rats. They all lived. We started with 5. We ended up with close to 300 by the end of the year. They all found homes. I know. It was a wonderful experience for the kids. They took care of them. They raised them. They fed them. They, did everything. And they all brought notes at the end of the year saying that they were allowed to take 1 to 5 home. I didn't check for parent signatures. They all had signatures. Anyhow, it was fun, but I always look back on that and think, what did I miss? Right? Because I didn't have the background. I didn't have a support system. No one was, there was no group like 100K that said, here's some supports for you. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in teacher recruitment and teacher training, as well as just in getting our kids, especially our girls, interested in STEM and knowing that there is a place for them in STEM. Mm-hmm. So I know I have 3 big buckets that we'll chat on. And so that sort of leads into this first one. And that is, how do we get some policies in place or some practices in place to improve STEM education for our children who are marginalized? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I will.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Maya. Go ahead.
I think that there are a couple of coming from a policy background and a policy space, and certainly everyone on this call has that background, but we're thinking about this from a local perspective. So many states, every state has its own adventure, has its own journey. Every state is its own has its own architecture for education landscape. And so a lot of this work has to take place locally. And what's missing from this right now is that we often, have the people who are most marginalized are missing from these equity conversations or these policy conversations. And so what needs to change on a policy level is we need the folks at the table to inform the policy discussions that really are going to be most impacted by the policies we put in place. So that's number one. And then number 2 is this perception of being a teacher, this perception of the profession in general, this savior mentality that's associated with people in a caring profession. We need to kind of start to take the profession more seriously, and that transitions into how we architect policy to support pathways for educators. And so it starts with politicians and people in communities respecting the profession, something that is critical to our survival as a collective. And so I think it's that mindset with which we design the policy. So those are the 2 things that I want to mention, like how we approach policy and rulemaking and who's at the table to do that. And Nikole, I'm sure you have some really distinct policy action you want to see elevated. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, no, but Maya, that's a first great start, because through my lens, I'm looking at girls. And so one of the things I feel is missing at the table is this holistic approach to policy. We kind of either do this monolithic or siloed thing where we focus specifically on the STEM or specifically on the social emotional, right? But what policy actually needs is, like, there's STEM education policy, right? So, addressing the teacher shortage, looking at the way that funding is in the, traditional school space, but like in my case, informal school space, which plays a critical role. But we also need to look at how are these policies also connected to childcare, pay parity, all of this is, violence, gender violence, and harassment in Title IX. Like all of these are impactful to whether or not my girl at Techbridge Girls persists and thrives in her STEM pathway. And so, if we continue to have a monolithic approach and a siloed approach to policies to impact this issue area of equitable STEM education without the nuances of all the other policies that impact the girls' pathway, then we're going to continue to kind of be the hamster or maybe the mouse on the wheel that never gets off. So that's where I feel is a big missing part when we are talking about specific populations is, are we really looking at the holistic ecosystem that impacts their ability to even get to the classroom, to have the class that they need, to stay in the class, to be present so that they can be engaged in the curriculum, and then be able to take the opportunities of that learning to opportunities for their future, right? And so I think that is the place where I would say. But, from a policy perspective, I think the way that we look at the data beyond disaggregated, I look at it as an intersectional way, because girls don't, just show up as a Black girl one day and a girl in the next day and a low income person the next day. It's intersectional. So how do we really look at data in that way so that we can get to better solutions? Addressing the STEM teacher shortage, because that is a real thing. For me, I want us to not only look at traditional teachers, but how do we look at informal spaces of learning, and how do we bring those educators who are educators, but educated differently, but also often more closely connected to the community. So how do we get them in the place and space to be able to deliver STEM education? How do we fund and invest in informal learning spaces, but also in leader of color-led organizations that are doing impactful work that need the resources to scale it? So those are some of the policies that I think would be critically important. And then, of course, relooking and reimagining the pedagogical approach to STEM education holistically. I am concerned if we are talking about what we're taking out of textbooks already, we were already absent.
Yeah.
What is going to be left to create these spaces of belonging and identity connection to STEM if we're not even present or even talked about in kind of the pedagogical curriculum? And curriculum.
And I'll take it back to, I want to highlight two aspects, or just kind of loop back on two aspects you elevated. One, our data systems, the thinking about intersectional approach to data that's informing the policy rulemaking is woefully inadequate. Our systems and structures for understanding even the STEM teacher shortage, the supply and demand needs, it's so variable state to state. We can't even snapshot a true image of what's going on with the workforce. And so that's important to understand. Why are people leaving? Why can't we retain? Like all of those things, we need improvement across to be able to understand that demographically, intersectionally, like our approach to data as well as our data systems are not sufficient. The other thing is we need to reduce the debt burden, right? Like, so policy and rulemaking associated with student, like to become a teacher, the cost to become a teacher, to apprentice, to do all of those things is a detractor and a real barrier for a lot of students. And so this idea of, and then the profession is underpaid. So the compensation on the other end. So when we talk about policy and rulemaking, even just that's like the baseline is, can people afford to become teachers? Is this even a viable profession? And supporting that. And I think that even extends to when we think about STEM career opportunities. STEM teaching is one of those career pathways. Why would I choose to be a STEM teacher if I can go into a STEM profession, right? Even if I'm more inclined and more gifted to teach and to be that bridge for students, I'm not going to choose that. I'm not going to opt into it because it's not viable for me. So at a policy landscape, we're thinking about what are the data systems that are informing and how can we structure those better? And then also we need to really critically attack this idea of the debt burden for students in the country.
You two have touched on probably 10 points, and I did not take notes. Um, we would be here all day if we went down each one. But it was interesting. We talked when Maya, you just talked about the debt burden. I am in the second draft of my upcoming book, which, cross fingers, will be released before the end of the year, on equitable instructional practices. And in there, I touched on the fact that our teaching force in America is more than 80% white, and majority women at that. And my editor, with the margin note she wrote back, is, why do you think that is, or why is that? Can you explain? The debt burden is a big part of it. If we already know that we've got this historic disproportionality in who goes to college, who can afford to go to college, and that people of color don't have multi-generational wealth that will fund their college education. And so our debt burdens already are going to be higher. We've got to take out loans to go to college, unless we are gifted athletes who go on a scholarship, which, doesn't happen to most of us, not to the vast majority of us. So there's that college debt. And when you finish your 4 years, the idea of picking up another year or two and continuing to do practicum that you don't get paid for as an educator, right? That student teaching portion, there's another 6 months of not getting paid to do work. The idea of doing that and taking on more debt to make as much money coming out of that as someone who's an entry level, and this is not a ding on the profession, it's just the example that my husband always brings up, an entry level customer service representative who can work from home as long as they have a monitor, the company provided laptop, and a telephone. They're making just as much money doing that. And you want me to take that same pay, get 2 more years of education, and go into a school where it's ill-equipped, I'm not supported, and I'm dealing with all of the challenges that come with teaching in America for the same amount of money? I would really, 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 really just have to want to be an educator in order to do that. And one of the other things you both touched on is this elevating the profession. And I had this wonderful conversation years ago with a university professor, School of Ed professor, and she said, teaching isn't a profession, it's a pre-profession, because we don't have consistent professional standards. I always say, here's always my test of whether or not it's a true profession. Can you get sued for malpractice? Doctors can, lawyers can, dentists can. If you're an architect and you misdesign a building and people die, you can get sued for that, right? But if you're a teacher, I'll use the exact. I make a distinction between teachers and educators. So I use the word instructor for people who are tasked to provide instruction in the classroom. A teacher is going to give information, an educator is going to make sure their kids get what they need and lead them out, right? It's just use word morphology to get down into those meanings. But this quandary that we have of doing what's right for children and being paid less money, or not doing right for children and getting paid as much as we are, right? We've got to deal with that from a policy perspective. So elevating teaching or educating to the level of professionalism is going to take a lot of work. And that's a policy issue. It's a societal issue in valuing the task or the job that is done in educating our children. And then you said the data systems, right? Woefully inadequate. When I'm doing the research for my book, and I'm living always in the NCES database, when I look at, and the category that I always say is the most problematic for me, or that's the most problematic, is Asian. Because you're talking about so many different groups, cultural, ethnic groups of children. And if you can disaggregate the data by ethnicity within that broader category of Asian, you will see distinct differences between our children who are Cambodian or Hmong, that come from pre-literate societies, compared to those who are maybe 3rd, 4th, or 5th generation Japanese who've been here forever. We don't look at those distinctions. We're grouping all Black African American the experience of an African immigrant, especially those who are coming because they're being displaced, very different from the experience of our multi-generational children descended from enslaved people. We've just got all these, I don't want to go down my problem with the group that's titled Hispanic.
We can go there, though.
Yeah.
We can go there.
Yeah, I ask the question to groups when I'm working with educators. So if you're Hispanic, your choices are to be white or black or Asian. But when I look at the indigenous people of Central and South America, they are not white, black, or Asian.
Right.
And if you look at from the history side, that comes from a treaty with the United States and this promise to differentiate between the indigenous people and the white Spaniards who were Hispanic. And that's where it's just all this horrible stuff. And it just does so much damage to our children because we cannot really dig deeply into who are we missing and how are we missing them, because we can't get into that granular level of data.
And it gets to Nicole's point too earlier about how we view a whole person, right? This intersectional identity. And so we've used data, we've weaponized data. We have a history of weaponizing data, categorizing. It's rife with how people have leveraged data to empower themselves to make the changes they see fit, right? I see it when I look back at my family's history and the census data. One year we're white, 1 year we're mixed, 1 year where I'm indigenous. When I look at my ancestors, and a 23andMe will tell you that there's no person coming out of Central or South America that isn't a blend of a number of different, and so it is,
or a Black American that is
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And so it's how are we looking or leveraging data is huge to understand the world we're in, to be able to affect good policy and support that. I hear that. I wanted to kind of address this conversation around professionalism of the teaching field, because it's something we talk about a lot with the early childhood teaching core that's starting to become more and more policied as well. Nikole spoke to the informal ed sector as well, and that we see a move towards professionalizing after school educators, all of these different things. We're starting to see colleges and universities pop up with certifications and licensing for out of school time. Museum programs have had a little bit more of that history, but we see that push as well. And so as we look at the field becoming more professionalized, we don't see that professionalism matched with the pay that you would see in other professions at all. And so it's like you have this element of control and standardization that's not matched with the level of respect as deemed in a capitalist society with pay, right? And so that is the mismatch that we're seeing. And so when we talk about teaching, as a teacher, I had 3 side hustles, right? Because I needed to, and I have an obligation as an eldest daughter to support and care for others. And I needed to make sure that I could do that, right? And so when we think about my story is not the story, it's a story of many. And so like, how do we ensure compensation is equitable? How do we ensure that compensation invites people to choose this as a profession if they are called to it? And then how do we, like you're saying, how do we attribute that, the same level of respect? Can you get sued for, I think we don't hear about teachers getting sued so much as we hear about ineffective practice and ineffective measures. And that is that's connected with student test scores. Right. And so often that's the measure that we ascribe to success or ineffectiveness in teaching versus nurturing, like a culturally responsive classroom that supports belonging. If your test doesn't reflect that, then
you've blown it on the classroom culture and everything else.
Exactly. And so and then you've also taught students what is important to you or what is important, the only thing that should be important to them. And so, as we cycle back to this curriculum issue and policy issue, I think there are 2 things I would be remiss, and I think Nikole would share this with you, as we think about serving young women in STEM and women of color. We need to attend to the detracking of high school science and math pathways so that our young women have access to courses maybe that aren't always available to them. And so when we think about the high school experience, we tell students so quickly that they're not good at STEM by the way we push them into or manage our master schedule, right?
Yeah.
Or what they have access to.
Well,
Yeah.
it goes back to kindergarten. It's interesting.
Oh.
It's a piece of a chapter in my book. The sorting process begins in kindergarten, right? Where teachers' perceptions about who's smart, who's well behaved and quiet, who's attractive, so you don't need to study. You're cute. You won't need to learn as much. These things happen through implicit bias starting at kindergarten. And if we look at not just, the offering of equity indicators, I look at things through, and one is determining, is this available and offered versus is it there with a pathway for children to get into it and master it once they're there? And so if we go all the way down to kindergarten, first and second grade, if we're not providing appropriate education in math and science at that level, then when they get to high school, even if AP is available or offered, they don't have the background to get into it, nor do they have the background to thrive once they're in there. So we've got that, again, you talk about that holistic viewpoint, right? We've got to look at school as a whole from PK or TK through 12, and that kids have pathways and opportunities to get there no matter who they are, where they come from, what that homeschool, home language, home background, any of that is.
Yeah. And I would just add to that from the K, to 2 student perspective, think about the elementary teacher, right? And how they are actually trained. One of the things that we did early in our tenure when we were trying to kind of look at our model at Techbridge Girls was we saw that there was such a lack of confidence in our educators to bring science activities and concepts to like the K through 2 area, right? Even third and fourth, really. There was a lack of confidence because it's not necessarily what was trained in their service. And they, didn't know how to bring it in a developmental way. So not only are our children needing it, because this is, K through 3 is actually a very influential time when they start to experience these things and can start to have a connection or a relativeness with it. But then you have, from an educator training perspective, that gap that they are not confident to bring those things into it. So technically your student is not getting real science and math exposure in a deep, intentional way until maybe 4, going into middle school, maybe. And that's
maybe
not
middle
talking
school
about district, Title I district. I'm not even talking about, the districts that are more challenged and less resourced, right? I think about my son myself, literally he just was put into a STEM after school program. The only reason why I think they did is because they knew what I did for a living and they wanted me to volunteer. Literally, and it was a selective thing. My other neighbors, they were like, Nikole, Xavier's in STEM, what's that? I didn't get a note for that. So it was a very small selective group that got exposure. He's in 3rd grade.
It's enrichment. It's not, and it's not for a select few.
And it's not thought of. One of the personal pet peeve. Now, literacy has always been my area. So, I know that we have to have foundational literacy and foundational math for kids to do well in STEM. But when we're looking at what I always say, what gets tested or what gets checked is what gets respect in our classrooms. States aren't testing on science until maybe 4th grade. So everything K1, 2, and 3 is reading and math. And even if you've got a science program adopted, it's if we have time after getting through all that we need for reading and all that we need for math, maybe science and maybe a little social studies is going to get taught. And so we have this, we already start them too far behind by the time they get to 4th grade, maybe. Fifth grade, maybe. Kind of with you, Maya, when you were shaking your head, it's when they get to middle school and they actually have a science course because they're going to a different teacher every single period, that they're going to science as a class, as opposed to having a self-contained classroom, a multi-subject teacher who's teaching everything, and not getting around to the science either because there's no time or because of their comfort in teaching the subject matter. Anyhow.
So the second policy I think I'm hearing from Dr. Berry and Nikole and myself is that every kid needs access to science in elementary and in early childhood. Otherwise,
and
that
I'll
identity
qualify
development.
that with, not access. Not
No.
access.
No.
They need instruction and they need mastery to a standard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that belonging and STEM identity, we can't wait till 9th grade to say, oh, now STEM is important. We want you to be good at it without laying those foundations in place. And you're right. It can't be joyful unless you've had experience in it.
I'm reminded, again, I've been doing a lot of editing on the book. So there's all this stuff and every time you say so, I remember we just worked on that. When growing up in California in the 60s and 70s, I was one of those kids that was identified. Back then we had the National Defense and Education Act. Remember, the whole thing was about combating the Soviet threat. And so they were identifying students by IQ tests. And while those were horribly flawed, and that's a whole other story, I was one of those kids that was identified in 3rd grade as being in that top 2%, blah, blah, whatever, with a very, very specific focus on preparing these children to become scientists, engineers, the people that we need to combat the big Soviet threat. And while that's kind of good, because we were very selfishly, we were getting so much enrichment and things that the rest of our peers were not getting. It was great for us, but not for our peers. And so we had, the country had the motivation to change how instruction was provided because they needed that expertise in a group of young people coming up. We don't do that anymore. Now, tracking is not good, right? That's not good. Isolating this group of kids, not necessarily the best, but there is a way to identify where children have innate talents and abilities, desires, and aptitudes, and provide instruction that meets that need. When we're talking about equity in instruction, right, giving them what they need to become the best version of themselves that they can and that they want to become, we're getting there. I don't think we have the political will or the desire to truly meet the needs of every single child.
Well, Dr. Berry, this is really interesting.
Maya's disagreeing with me.
Oh, go ahead.
No?
That's my thoughtful face, but Nikole, Nikole has a direct thought. I'm ruminating on what you're saying. Yes.
Okay.
I would love your two brains, because this morning, ironically, I wake up and I had this whole full conversation with myself. I guess this is what post CEO life happens. I don't know. But I thought about the manufacturing revolution, right? When manufacturing was the thing of our future. It was our economic engine. It was the foundation of all of these things. And I think about schools were structured and designed to output workforce that would understand how to do the mundane routine work in manufacturing.
And we haven't changed it.
We have
not shifted from that model.
We have not shifted.
But this is the interesting part, right? The whole ecosystem rallied around this industrial movement for the country.
For this.
Right.
For capitalism.
Yeah.
And I totally don't disregard all that. So I think about STEM, what it is now. even for the capitalism, how are we not rallying around this explicit revolution of industry? It's still capitalism, but everybody, I mean, not saying it was fair and equitable, but the brown people on the one side of the track, their parents were going to the factory. The low income white folks, their fathers were going to the factory. There was a system in which we understood that this thing was an economic engine and plight for us.
So I have two thoughts on that.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, because I don't know why it came in my head this morning, but I was just wondering, like, what was it about that we could rally?
That was syncing up.
At that time, we were not a global economy. The workforce we had was the workforce that was in front of us. If we needed a widget, we needed to train the local people to create the widget. Now, if we want something, we go to where the talent is, and we take the talent from where it is to produce what we want. It's so, I mean, so this, it's a global, truly a global economy. If I can't build, and based on capitalism, right? If I can't build a car in America, every single piece of it to get the profit margin that I want out of it, where do I need to have which pieces built? And that's where I'll go to get those pieces built. And it'll be cheaper for me to do that and move those pieces over there to have those people assemble it and move those pieces from there to have something else done to it. That's cheaper. I make more money doing that than teaching and training the people who are here to do that work.
And that means that a system that's set up to be good, to train, it doesn't have the same outcomes that it's designed to, like, we're not achieving the same goal at the end of it, right? The intention is a bit different, and it becomes something that is not like a necessity, but it's a nice to have, right? And so, like, when we think about this fourth wave or this shift over into AI, we were all pushing computer science, coding, like learning how to do that. But the truth of the matter is AI and machine learning is coding faster than we can teach the kids. So who gets to design and who gets to create is the power structure that we need to invest in, and we need to kind of support our students. And I think especially students of color is this idea of entrepreneurship, this tinkering, this creating. Like, it's not enough to just memorize the science terms, but how do I leverage those skills to design and create the using of AI? As how are we teaching kids to use the AI and the tech as an aid, as a coach, as a support, so they're not the ones who are. So we have more designers in the system and creators in the system, and less of like, I'm just going to punch a code in. That's not going to be a job that's needed in the future. And so I'm concerned about that, and how we infrastructure schools to support that creativity and that mindset when so many of our students don't have access to art, don't have access to music, don't have access to STEM in the early grades or even, through. So this creative aspect is, I think, missing from the schooling right now.
And then to Dr. Berry, your point then, right? Because now I'm like, okay, you gave a real, good answer, right? So now what my brain is saying is, what is the incentive to do all this great work that me and Maya do every single day? Right? Like that. Yeah. And I'm not saying we know what the incentive is, but I'm like, literally, if that is the mindset, I can go somewhere else to get it better and cheaper than investing into what we have here. Then that is a rat race that we are always going to be falling behind in.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say,
even if like, the doom and gloom, but like, this is the nut that I'm sensing is what we have to be like. What's coming in my head is like, why we have to show our worthiness of investment.
Yeah.
Is
But
that
then
what we're telling
teaching,
our kids?
but then teaching becomes even more
Mhm.
of an essential profession. Because
Right.
when she's talking about the world, we're thinking about opening up the workforce and the
Mhm.
possibilities and the opportunities for our babies and our children and our communities to you have the local context and economy, we have the national economy, but that's not where the buck stops anymore.
No.
Here is the platter,
Yeah.
my child.
And I think one of the things, in a
Yeah.
personal observation, one of the things I see is that, and I'll say in the Black community, because I can't speak for all, we are not, and I can't speak for all of the Black community either. So this is like qualified, what I see. A trend that I see is that we are not raising our children up from the cradle to say, you find what you like, you work hard, and wherever those opportunities are, you go there. You learn to speak Chinese or Japanese or Russian or whatever other languages. We're going to start teaching those languages in kindergarten so that you can go out to wherever you want to go. We are stuck in, I'm going to grow up here. I'm going to go to school here. I'm going to work here. I'm going to die here. We are not creating global citizens because we have this, and I'll say more nationally, is this America first mindset where we are the best of everything. So we got to stay here. There's no point in going to someplace else or even thinking that that's an option. We're not raising children to think about global opportunity. We are, and this will take us down a very different path we don't need to go. But what our children are receiving from media, from social media, from everything is that it's all about money and it's all about glitz and glamour. And so you ladies, all three of us, are fighting against these very, for lack of a better word, sexy things that are enticing our children away from what you two are working towards. And that's a fight that we have to keep having, because we cannot, I don't think we can continue down this pathway of our children not receiving what they should be getting to make them the best versions of themselves that they can be, because we don't know when this political system that we're in will fall apart, when this global economy will fall apart, when we will be faced with the next global war, where we won't have that global economy and the trade that we've been relying on to take care of us. If we don't have our own intellectual capital here, I don't think that we continue to thrive or even survive as a nation. Keep doing your work is what I'm saying. We need it. And we have, it's like, it's like, where's the motivation? Because it's the right thing to do.
But
it's right for our kids.
It is. And Nikole said it earlier too. Like when we think about, we're always going to be, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we're designing for an industry that is going to evolve or exist, like we're always going to be one step behind. But when we center the child, and we understand that that child has multiple identities, and we design for that, then we open up a world of opportunity for them. Like you said, when we have global competencies, when we say the world is your oyster and here are the skills that will help you, like find your joy in this place, right? Find your space in this space. It becomes a different game, and it becomes a different design that we're architecting the education and schooling for. And we're not doing
educating.
that right now.
That is educating and not teaching.
Exactly.
There's the difference.
Yeah.
Well, gee, we only sort of touched on the one bucket, and but I think we went in enough different areas and touched on so much in that. I think we probably go on for 2 more hours, but that does not work. That does not work. So I want to ask you both, and this goes to the way I sign off. And I always say, I steal it from Angela Davis, the great Dr. Davis, hoping that one day she'll hear it and come on my show. And her quote was, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." We talked a lot about things that we want to change. I want to ask each of you, what is the thing you cannot accept? And then what can listeners do to support a change to that effect? And Nikole, I'll start with you.
I cannot accept that people are more connected than we are different and have the same wants in our future and really do have the space to be empathetic to the needs of our neighbor. So what I cannot accept is that we are a mean, unthoughtful, uncaring people. I think that humanity is within us because we want it for ourselves, and that we have to be reminded that we are actually more connected than we are disconnected, and that it just takes intentional just awareness of us not being caught in the bubbles of our life, but knowing that those bubbles interconnect with each other all the time. So that's what I would just say, is that I just cannot accept that we just do not have the humanity and empathy for one another to want to do best for us as a collective community. And everybody's role is to remember and remind yourselves when you get stuck into your silo, your bubble of thinking, that thinking is not actually that different than what the next person next to you wants for themselves and their future as well, and for their children and then this next generation.
All right. Maya.
Well, that was wonderful. I think I'm going to second that. And also, I think a little bit more like loop back to I can't accept that every student in elementary school is not getting science education. I think we have the power, the will, the motivation as a collective to know what's right for our children. And the fact that our teachers aren't getting the training they need, like Nikole mentioned earlier, to be able to support that. And also the fact that our babies are going to school and not getting that science education from very early grades is something we have the power to shift and change. And I can't accept that it is that difficult to institute elementary education for all students in this country to have access to high quality science. Like that should be a mission that we can seek to end any gaps around in the next 2 or 3 years as a collective. And so that is what I am baffled by, and that keeps me up at night. Why is it so hard for us to do this? And I think more readily is that I want our students to have joyful, rigorous, and relevant STEM education. And I know that we have the power to affect change there. So I can't accept that is something we're not equipping educators to manifest in their classrooms. And so I want more meaning for our students in STEM education, because that's where the magic happens. When you can find yourself, see yourself, and have joyful learning experiences, that's where that clicks for our kids. And we need more of that happening in classrooms across the nation. So those are my two.
Ditto.
And I said
Plus one,
but that's okay. I got you both on all of your points. Equity warriors out there, my guests today, and I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I did, have been Maya Morales Garcia and Nikole Collins-Puri. Their contact information is down in the notes. Ladies, thank you so much for coming on today. I've had a wonderful time. Like I said, I think we could talk for 2 more hours. We just won't do it on air, and we won't do it today. It has been enlightening, inspiring, exhilarating. Equity warriors out there, STEM needs girls, and it needs children of color. So find out what's happening in that regard in your area. Connect with these 2 organizations to get supports for your district. You know that we are well into the primary election season, so make sure you vote and vote like your life and your children's lives depended on it, because it does. And when you're voting, make sure you look into those local elections, school board. We're talking education here. Mayors, there are some cities where the mayors are in charge of schools, and of course your city councils. Attend that local school board meeting, find out what's happening with STEM, and continue to join me next week. Connect with me on social. Use those links down in the notes. Send your questions, topics, and requests to info@askdrberry.com, and I will answer those questions and continue to bring you experts like you heard from today to help address those topics. As always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. You can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.